Welcome to Washington Today for October 10th, 2022. I'm Gary Starikoff. Thanks a lot for listening this afternoon. Here are some of today's headlines. President Biden pledged, quote, unwavering support for Ukraine following a Russian missile attack against multiple cities that shattered buildings, knocked out power and water, and killed at least a dozen civilians and injured scores more. The attack comes days after a major bridge linking occupied Crimea with the Russian mainland was damaged by an apparent truck bomb. We'll hear some of what that attack sounded like and what Russian President Vladimir Putin had to say about it coming up. Several U.S. airport websites were temporarily down on Monday morning following a cyber attack by Russian-backed hackers. The hackers, who call themselves KillNet, posted on Telegram a list of websites they plan to target, including government sites from Florida, Alabama, Delaware, and Hawaii. According to a new poll from Axios, nearly 4 out of 10 Republicans and 1 in 4 Democrats say they'll blame election fraud if their party doesn't win control of Congress in November. Writing on Axios' website, Margaret Talev and David Nather say, quote, a month out from the 2022 midterms, 2020's big lie is alive and morphing into a broader distrust of institutions and elections that threatens to become entrenched. According to the poll, the Republicans surveyed are significantly more likely than Democrats to not only predict that election fraud will play some role if their party loses, but to feel that suspicion intensely. The poll was conducted by Ipsos on September 28th, 29th on their online survey panel based on a sample of 1,004 general population adults aged 18 or older. We begin in Ukraine, where Russia unleashed a barrage of deadly missile attacks across the country, not seen since the earliest days of the war. The attacks come just days after a major bridge linking occupied Crimea with the Russian mainland was damaged by an apparent truck bomb. Here's what some of it sounded like in Kiev when reporter Hugo Beshega was live on the BBC.
So the fear is that this could trigger a very strong Russian response. We saw yesterday that a residential area of the city of Zaporizhia, a major city in the south of the country, very close to the front lines, was hit. More than a dozen. So
Hugo Beshega was not injured in that attack and was seen live on the air later from an underground shelter. The cities of Lviv in the west, Kharkiv in the east, and Zaporizhzhia in the south also took severe hits. Russian President Vladimir Putin described the attacks as retaliation against, quote, Ukrainian terrorist forces.
We have no doubts that this is a terrorist attack aimed at the destruction of the critical infrastructure of the Russian Federation. And authors, executors, and masterminds are the Secret Service of Ukraine.
In a statement posted on Telegram, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said, quote, they are trying to annihilate us and wipe us off the face of the earth. That's it in a nutshell. And in a statement released by the White House, President Biden said, quote, the United States strongly condemns Russia's missile strikes today across Ukraine, including in Kiev. These attacks killed and injured civilians and destroyed targets with no military purpose. They once again demonstrate the utter brutality of Mr. Putin's illegal war on the Ukrainian people. And on Monday afternoon, the United Nations General Assembly opened an emergency meeting on Russia's latest annexation of parts of Ukraine. Here's Ukrainian Ambassador Sergiy Kyslytsya speaking at Monday's meeting.
Good afternoon. It's going to be a very difficult task for me today, for many reasons. It's barely 4 p.m. in New York, but my day has started almost 14 hours ago. It started 14 hours ago because my country was under attack. My immediate family was in a residential building under attack, unable to go to a bomb shelter because there was no electricity. Because Russia has already killed some of my family members, and we see no end to that cruelty. But let me start with a quote from a very respected gentleman in his country, from the president who was the first president ever directly elected in his country in a democratic way. And that is José Cerrato, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Uruguay, at the 6th plenary meeting of the UN Conference on International Organization in San Francisco on May the 1st, 1945, and I quote, "A stable and sane peace cannot be attained if nothing is done for the democratization of the world and the rule of freedom." Peace and democracy constitute complementary objectives, each of which is a guarantee and a motive for the either. In this regard, in the proposed international organization, there should not be admitted nations professing doctrines of aggression and war, which are inclined to undermine or destroy the order of juridical peace in the world. However, in order to be a member of international society, it is not enough to present the titles of peace-loving nations, but it is also necessary to be a freedom-loving nation. End of quote. José Cerrato of Uruguay. This is how our predecessors saw the way to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war at the dawn of our organization 77 years ago. Unfortunately, you can hardly hope for a stable and sane peace as long as an unstable and insane dictatorship exists in your vicinity. A dictatorship that actively uses missile terror against the civilian population and infrastructure of another state. Today, terrorist Russia shelled the capital city of Kiev and many other Ukrainian cities throughout the country with at least 84 missiles and 24 UAVs. Energy facilities, residential buildings, schools and universities, museums, and crossroads in the city centers were among the targets that the Russian Defense Ministry later declared legitimate. The entire world has once again seen the true face of the terrorist state that kills our people. Suffering defeats on the battlefield, Russia takes it out on the peaceful residents of Ukrainian cities. Today's strike killed at least 14 civilians and 97 were wounded. Deliberate targeting of civilians is a war crime. By launching missile attacks on civilians, sleeping in their homes or rushing to work, children going to schools, Russia has proven once again that it is a terrorist state that must be deterred in the strongest possible ways.
Ukrainian Ambassador to the UN Sergiy Kyslytsya speaking on Monday afternoon at the General Assembly emergency meeting. Also speaking, Russian Ambassador Vasily Nebenzya.
As we hear from their statements, peace in Ukraine is not something they need in principle. NATO, with which we encountered in Ukraine, only needs the escalation in the conflict as a step towards their plan that they have been working on for many years, namely to overcome, to be victorious, or at least severely undermine Russia. And Ukraine was chosen by these countries for that purpose, was brought under their control, and today is a platform for the testing of NATO weaponry and for a combat against Russia using other people down to the last Ukraine. Their geopolitical project aimed at keeping their domination, the domination of Western states, maintaining the well-being of the so-called Golden Billion, is something that they're trying to involve as many countries as possible into. Distinguished colleagues, just as earlier, we were accused when we tried to save the peoples of Asia, Africa, and Latin America from colonialism and exploitation. Here, once again, we are being accused when we are trying to protect our brothers and sisters in eastern Ukraine. Their right to life, first and foremost, the right to speak their language, to teach their children in their language, to honor the heroes who liberated their lands from fascism, rather those who collaborated with them and helped kill peaceful citizens. Those whom the current Ukrainian leadership called specimen, subhumans, and told them to get out and go to Russia for the future of their children and grandchildren. Those who heard the appeal and decided to move to Russia. And this is shown by the choice made by the millions of people during the referendum in DNR, LNR, in Zaporozhye, and in Kherson, where the absolute majority of those who voted supported the idea of having these regions accede to Russia. In our days, when all kinds of videos and comments are available in social networks, it's very difficult to counter the fact that this was a free expression of the people's will, fully in line with international rule of law rules. And this was confirmed by hundreds of observers, including Western observers, and also internet users, a majority of this view. The surveys in the internet show that most responders think that we need to respect the rights of those people to determine their future. Kiev and its Western backers, who covered up the crimes of the Maidan Authority all these 8.5 years, disagree with this. Those who claim that the referenda are illegitimate because the Kiev regime didn't agree with them had the exactly opposite stance when they spoke in the international court in favor of Kosovo separating from Serbia. Separation without any referenda, just on the basis of the statement about massive killings of the Albanians. And these are the affirmations which we all know today were as far from the truth as the glass vial held by Colin Powell in Security Council when he was talking about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
Russian Ambassador Vasily Nebenzya speaking at the United Nations General Assembly meeting in New York. You can see the entire General Assembly hearing at cspan.org and on our mobile video app, C-SPAN Now. You're listening to Washington Today.
Quick! Think of your favorite moments from a campaign debate. Okay, got it? You probably have in mind something that happened during a presidential or vice presidential debate, right? But what about a Senate, House, Governor, or Mayor debate? Drawing a blank? No worries. The C-SPAN podcast, The Weekly, has you covered.
Governor Childs, I'm going to ask you to limit your remarks to a minute, and I think that'll make the time even across the board.
Well, first, I want to call attention to this old liberal liar. You know, that goes on and on and on and on. My mama told me, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. But let me tell you, one other thing about the old liberal, the old he-coon walks just before the light of day.
The 1994 Florida governor debate should serve as your reminder. Yes, it's that time of year. Time to watch C-SPAN's coverage of Campaign 2022 debates, which also makes it time to download and listen to The Weekly's Top 10 list of most memorable moments from a Senate, House, Governor, or Mayor debate, all seen on C-SPAN. And now, in one easy place to enjoy, The Weekly Podcast. Find C-SPAN's The Weekly wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today. Here are some more headlines. North Korean state-run media broke its silence today on the country's recent missile tests, saying they are practice for tactical nuclear strikes. The state-run Korean Central News Agency said that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un ordered the test launches in response to large-scale Navy drills in the region by South Korean and U.S. forces. They also claimed the tests showed that North Korea's military is, quote, fully ready to hit and wipe out the set objects at the intended places in the set time. The missile tests set off air raid alarms across Japan over the weekend. This is the first official statement from the North Korean government about the tests, which have been going on since September 25th. New York Congressman and Republican candidate for governor Lee Zeldin said his family is safe after two strangers were shot outside his Long Island home on Sunday. Representative Zeldin said in a statement that he does not know the identities of the two people who were shot, but that they were found outside his home, which is in Shirley, New York. The congressman said he and his wife were not at home at the time of the shooting, but their teenage daughters were. He also said police officers are looking over the home security cameras. The two people who were shot were taken to local hospitals. Nevada Democratic Senator Catherine Cortez Masto announced that she brought in more than $1 million in online contributions following former President Trump's rally for her Republican challenger, Adam Laxalt, this past weekend. Senator Cortez Masto is considered one of the Democrats' most vulnerable incumbents this year. Her campaign's weekend haul helped top off more than $15 million raised by her campaign in the third quarter. Adam Laxalt's campaign has not yet reported its totals. NAACP President Derek Johnson is speaking out against comments made by Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville, the Republican, at that Nevada rally. Senator Tuberville said the Democrats want reparations for minorities because they are, quote, pro-crime. In a statement, Mr. Johnson said, quote, Senator Tuberville's comments are flat out racist, ignorant, and utterly sickening. His words promote a centuries-old lie about black people that throughout history has resulted in the most dangerous policies and violent attacks on our community. On today's Washington Journal, musician, author, and activist Daryl Davis talked about his efforts to combat racism in the U.S.
You know, I spent a lot of time as a child growing up overseas. I'm from here, of course, the United States, but my parents were U.S. Embassy. So I traveled a lot. And I was always in multicultural schools. You know, when in the 1960s, as a kid in grade school, my classmates were from Nigeria, Italy, Japan, Russia, you name it. If they had an embassy there, all of their children went to the same school. But every 2 years, you know, when you'd come back home, I would be either in all black schools or black and white schools, meaning the still segregated or the newly integrated. And we didn't have that multicultural classroom that I had overseas. Something was wrong. Something was wrong. And I didn't know what at the time. I couldn't put my finger on it until I was participating in a parade in which I was the only black Cub Scout in the parade. And everything was going fine until at one point I was having bottles and rocks thrown at me. This is 1968, and I did not understand that. My parents explained racism to me, and believe it or not, at the age of 10, when this happened, I had never heard the word racism. Why would I? It wasn't in my sphere. When I was living overseas, I was living probably 10 years ahead of my time because that multicultural environment had not yet come to our classrooms in this country. But, you know, when it finally did, I was already there. Some people were not.
When did you tell us about your first meeting with the KKK? How did that happen?
Well, I was playing in a bar in a town called Frederick, Maryland, about an hour and 20 minutes from Washington, D.C. And the bar was known as an all-white bar. Not that there were any signs, but black people knew they were not welcome there. And, you know, when you go somewhere where you're not welcome, alcohol is being served, it's not always a good situation. Well, I was playing with this popular country band, all white. I was the only black guy in the band and the only black guy in there. And when I came off the bandstand, a gentleman came up to me, put his arm around my shoulder, and told me how much he enjoyed my piano playing, and said this was the first time he'd ever heard a black man play piano like Jerry Lee Lewis. Well, I quickly told him where Jerry Lee Lewis got his style from black blues and boogie-woogie piano players. Well, the guy didn't believe me. He didn't even believe that I knew Jerry Lee Lewis after I told him Jerry Lee's a good friend of mine. He told me that himself. Well, he wanted to buy me a drink. I don't drink alcohol, but I went back to the table and he bought me a cranberry juice. He took his glass and he clinked my glass and said, you know, this is the first time I ever sat down and had a drink with a black man. Now I'm totally baffled. Like, how can this be? I know there are black people in Frederick, Maryland. I've seen them. So I asked him why. And at first he didn't answer me. He stared down at the tabletop. I asked him again and his buddy elbowed him and said, tell him, tell him. I said, tell me. And he said, I'm a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And I just burst out laughing at him because now I didn't believe him. I know a lot about the Klan. And then I'm just come up and embrace a black man, want to buy him a drink and hang out. It doesn't work that way. So I figured the guy's pulling a joke on me. While I'm laughing, he went inside his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and handed me his Klan membership card. I stopped laughing. It was for real. But the guy was genuinely friendly, genuinely interested in me. I guess he found me to be a novelty or something. And we talked about the Klan and some other things, but he gave me his number and wanted me to call him whenever I was to return to this bar with this band, because he wanted to bring his friends, meaning Klansmen and Klanswomen, to see, as he put it, the black man who plays piano like Jerry Lee Lewis. I'm not so sure he called me a black man to his friends, but that's how he explained it to me. So I'd call him, and he'd come out. When I called, he'd bring Klansmen and Klanswomen to see us play. They'd watch me play. They'd get out there and dance. And on the breaks, I'd make my way over to his tables, thank him for coming. Some of the Klan would hang there. They were curious, wanted to talk to me. A couple of them would get up and move across the room. Like, we don't want to talk to you. We don't want to touch you. We just want to look at you. So that's how that started. And a little while later, I decided to write a book on the Klan, because people can't sit down and talk. So I wanted to interview these people, go up north, go down south, Midwest, West, interview different Klan leaders and members, and find out, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? And that was the basis for Clandestine Relationships. And that became the first book written by a black author on the Ku Klux Klan from the perspective of in-person interviews.
I imagine from your interviews, there's people, they have certain perceptions of a member of the Ku Klux Klan. What do you think of those perceptions, and what have you discovered in talking with these people?
Well, of course, they have their own perceptions until they meet somebody in person, and then that perception can be shaped, okay? But what you want to be careful of is, you find somebody say, oh, well, Daryl's okay for a black guy. It's all those other people out there. So as soon as I get into a relationship with one of these people, and I find I can trust that person, the person trusts me, then I introduce them to some other friends of mine, black people, Jewish people, other white people who look just like them, who may not agree with their views. So generally, they begin to see these other people and think, well, maybe Daryl's not the exception. Maybe I'm the exception for thinking this way. And it doesn't happen overnight. A Klansman or Klanswoman is not stamped out of a standard cookie cutter. They may be monolithic in their ideological views, but in other ways they're not. They're just like anybody else. And I have found, traveling around the world, between my childhood and my adulthood as a musician, when you combine those two sets of travels, I've been to 61 countries on 6 continents. I've played in all 50 states. And I can tell you something, no matter how far I go from our country, the U.S., whether it's right next door to Canada or right next door to Mexico or halfway around the globe, no matter how different the people may be who I encounter, they don't look like me, they don't speak my language or worship as I do, I always conclude that we all are human beings. And as such, we all want these basic 5 core values in our lives. Everyone wants to be loved. We all want to be respected. We want to be heard. We want to be treated fairly and truthfully. We want the same things for our family as anybody else wants for their family. And if we can learn to apply those 5 values, or any of those 5 values, when we find ourselves in an adversarial situation or a culture or society in which we're unfamiliar, I guarantee the navigation will be much more smooth and much more positive. It doesn't all have to be about race either, anything controversial. Let's take abortion, nuclear weapons, the war between Iraq, Afghanistan, or the war in Ukraine and Russia, or the last presidential election, the one coming up. These are all hot topics. You're on one side, somebody's on the other side. Apply those values, and you can navigate the conversation.
How many Klan members have you talked to, do you think?
I've talked to probably several hundred. I have, over 200 have left. And I have the robes and flags and all that kind of stuff to prove it.
And tell us about that, because there are pictures on your website and they give you these things and you hold on to them. Why is that?
It's a part of American history. It's a shameful part of American history, but nonetheless, it is our history. And our history should not be destroyed. Everybody has history, good, bad, ugly, and shameful. And we need to learn from it. For the same reason, you don't destroy the things in the Holocaust Museum. We all have to learn from these things.
And do you hold them at your home, or how do you display them? How does that work?
I keep most of them locked up off-site. And I have a few in my home that I travel with when I go and give lectures.
musician, author, and activist Daryl Davis. You can see more from this segment at cspan.org/Washington Journal and on the C-SPAN Now video app. Gas prices are on the rise again following a promise of production cuts by the OPEC Plus group of oil exporting countries last week. The low inventories have prompted the Biden administration to consider banning exports of refined products out of the U.S. Here's Texas Republican Roger Williams speaking about oil prices and energy on Fox Business.
Give us your take on oil and whether or not you believe we've seen these prices peak.
Well, I mean, I hope so. I'm not so sure we have. We're going to see them continue to probably go up if, as long as this administration does not want to drill here. I mean, this president's out there begging to Venezuela, he's begging to OPEC, begging the world for more oil, when he ought to go out to Midland, Texas and beg. We got plenty of resources right here in the country. We know before we shut down the Keystone Pipeline how strong this country can be as far as the world stage in oil production. So we need to turn it loose. We need to all-above approach, let people compete, quit subsidizing, and let's get us out of this mess. But we're in a situation now where we just rely on everybody else to raise our fuel prices instead of controlling them and bringing them down by drilling in this country.
Texas Republican Congressman Roger Williams on Fox Business. According to AAA, the national average price of a gallon of gas is now at $3.92. And finally, today, communities across the country are celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day. And while it isn't a federal holiday, in recent years, an increasing number of communities in several states recognize it in lieu of Columbus Day. President Biden has issued a proclamation recognizing the holiday to honor the sovereignty, resilience, and contributions that Native Americans have made to the world. And Interior Secretary Deb Haaland is also honoring the day. She put out this statement on Twitter.
Hi, everyone. It's Deb Haaland, Secretary of the Interior and proud member of the Pueblo of Laguna. I wish you all a happy Indigenous Peoples Day. Today, we have a lot to celebrate. The strength of Indigenous communities, the traditions and cultures that have survived millennia, and our fervent hope for the future. The Biden-Harris administration has ushered in a new era for Indian country. That means greater representation and recognition as we face the opportunities and challenges before us. At Interior, we're incorporating valuable Indigenous knowledge into our decision-making. We're partnering with Native communities to co-steward our public lands and waters. We're investing in tribal communities, thanks to President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law and American Rescue Plan. And we're working to address legacy trauma and inequity that Indigenous people have endured for far too long. You can count on us and me to continue this momentum to ensure that Indigenous communities have the resources they need to continue to thrive for future generations. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day, everyone.
Interior Secretary Deb Haaland. If you missed any of this program, you can find it on our C-SPAN Now mobile app at cspan.org/podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like more on the stories that are shaping Washington delivered daily right to your inbox, you can subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter, word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Stairkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day we're taking your calls live, on the air, on the news of the day, and we'll discuss policy issues that impact you. Coming up Tuesday morning, Brookings Institution Senior Fellow John Hudak discusses President Biden's pardon for people convicted of simple marijuana possession under federal law. Then Shork Report co-founder and oil analyst Stephen Shore on the decision by OPEC Plus to restrict production, its effect on gas prices, and the Biden administration's response. Watch Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern Tuesday morning on C-SPAN or on C-SPAN Now, our free mobile video app. Join the discussion with your phone calls, Facebook comments, text messages, and tweets.